Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast today. I'm actually super happy to be joined by global biophilic design expert Oliver Heath, who is speaking at our Biophilic Design Conference on the 17th of November 2025 at Westminster in London. Tickets are still currently available. The theme of the conference is policy, people and planet, and we're going to be exploring all of those things today in this podcast. Oliver is, of course, known to many people in biophilic design and also to those who work in and advocate sustainability and regenerative design. He and his practice, Oliver Heath Design, have worked with many household names like John Lewis, Knight Frank, Pullman Hotels, Westfield, the Crick Institute, Interface, and many more. And he's also written a marvelous book and a brilliant introduction to biophilic design called Healthy Home. And we did a podcast about that and biophilic home design before, and I'll put the links in the spiel that goes with this podcast. And just finally, you've obviously seen him on TV as well, but I'm going to leave Oliver to introduce himself and what he does currently. But thanks, first of all, Oliver, thanks very much for joining us in your super busy schedule.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to join you, Ness.
Lovely, thanks. Well, obviously, many people who listen to this podcast know who you are, but can you maybe give us a quick overview on what you and Oliver Heath Design do, please? Maybe what your current focus is.
My name's Oliver Heath, thank you. And I'm the founder and director of Oliver Heath Design, the eponymously named design company. We're based down in Brighton. We've been set up since 2003. And for the last 15 years, my work has specifically focused on how we create happier and healthier environments with a particular focus to biophilic design. Now, within that area, we've operated in a number of ways across all different sort of building typologies, but essentially the things that we do the most of is strategy and consultation. So we work alongside wider organizations or project design teams. We are, of course, spatial designers, so we run and design projects as lead designers. We write thought leadership pieces, so we've written 6 or 7 white papers on biophilic design and a number of other papers for other organizations. And also, I spend a lot of my time giving talks and seminars in education environments to organizations. I teach architects and interior designers about how to adopt health and well-being and biophilic design principles and embed them into the work that they're doing. So it covers a whole range of different sort of work. No 2 days or projects are ever the same. So we're always having to remain on our feet. And it's been such an interesting and fascinating journey. For so many years now, we've been writing these white papers, developing these ideas, and we're now moving into this sort of, I think, much more of an implementation stage of our work as the ideas and the awareness of biophilic design has increased.
Great. I say people know about you, a great deal, and thanks so much for that introduction and getting a little bit more understanding about all the little and the massive aspects that you deal with. Obviously, we've spoken about biophilic design in previous podcasts, and people can rewind and have a look. And I'll put the links in the spiel that goes with the podcast, the previous conversations. But I wanted to maybe explore a little bit about the trends that we're seeing. I mean, if we can use the word trends, I mean, it's kind of, but there's
Movements. I think movements is better than
movement,
trends. Trends
exactly.
suggest that it's sort of transitory and that they're sort of a bit frivolous. But I think a movement is a stronger approach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But maybe we could only then start talk about how we're moving beyond the just plants era. I think people are having maybe a greater understanding, and how we can help develop, or people are having a stronger understanding of this deeper and more holistic approach to biophilic design, which supports the health of all life. I don't know what your thoughts on where we
Yeah,
are.
it's really interesting. I mean, because I've been teaching the subject to architects over the last 15 years, I've seen a real transformation in the way that the general built environment community approach the subject. When I first would walk into an architect's practice, you'd ask people to put their hands up and say, who's heard of biophilic design? And a few people would tentatively put their hands up. And now when we walk into practices and organizations, there's a far greater understanding, awareness of the subject, a recognition that one aspect of it is about this sort of deeper connection to the most obvious form of nature in people's minds, which is plants and trees, but also a more wider recognition of the general approach, this human-centered approach, the recognition that it is an evolutionary design ethos that recognizes that we have this genetic inheritance to want to be in and around nature, and when we're in these spaces, it can have incredible effects on our physiological and psychological state, and as a result, actually have such tangible benefits for building performance and help us to um, support the intended function of a space whilst also minimizing some of those negative costs. So there is this sort of general understanding and recognition that this is a really important way to create a more successful building and outcome. So when clients are coming to us with a sort of problem that needs fixing, they see that the role of nature, the role of well-being, and the people in the building are all intertwined. And it's a part of this more sustainable approach that organizations are now taking, not just to create a better quality of building, but also to reflect the values and ethos of the organization through their environmental social governance.
Yeah, that's it's good to hear that whole that the businesses are also incorporating this into their ethics, I suppose, almost like their ethics statement and their mission statement. What used to be when we were when in our day.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, it's interesting, so much of the evidence and the research points towards how nature can support the individual. And that's really important in what we call the sort of neuroscientific approach. But what we're also recognizing now is that companies are going, we've got problems getting people back into the office and meeting and talking and sharing ideas. Can biophilic design help us sort this out? And actually, right from the outset, the likes of Stephen Kellett recognized the importance of nature to improve people's experiences of the built environment and more deeply connect them to spaces, places, and the human and wider natural kind of life that exists in and around buildings. So that sense of community was always sort of embedded within it. And now what we're being asked to do a lot more of is look at how communities can be enhanced through that nature connection and how we can use elements of nature. So it's an interesting approach that it's not just about the individual, it's also about how we bring people together and put them in a better state of mind to share conversations, ideas, to have innovative conversations and to kind of spark these new ideas that are so important for organizations.
Absolutely, absolutely. And our environment has such an impact on how we perform, well, how we think, what we do, how we interact, just different, yeah, just how we feel. Obviously, we talk about
Yeah,
how we feel in biophilic design. I wanted to talk about this whole net zero and carbon reduction thing that everybody is like, all the businesses, as well as their ethics and everything else, they're with the climate crisis that's thrust upon us, and every sort of design decision and every specification decision that we make has an impact on our planet. Seriously, it does. And that, for me, biophilic design, the biophilic hypothesis, if we use that, I know I bang on about this all the time, but if we use the biophilic hypothesis to make those design decisions, is it going to benefit life? Then do it. If it's not going to benefit life, then don't do it. That's like kind of sort of simple kind of concept. What are your thoughts on how businesses are trying to address net zero and carbon reduction? Are we, we're going beyond carbon. Um, how does biophilic design really support this experience? Also inside and out the building, because it's not just about interiors.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
about
I mean, this is a really important question, and it's one that sort of we've been grappling with for a few years because I came at the subject from a point of wanting to support and the understanding the awareness of how we create a more sustainable approach to the built environment, but got frustrated with the idea that people would go, well, we just want a bigger kitchen or a bigger house. We'll do the kind of sustainability bit later on, or it get kicked down the road. Um, and we're facing these enormous challenges right now, the climate crisis, the biodiversity loss crisis, social and economic inequity crises. These are really big, complex, interlinked issues that we're simply not going to be able to solve by simply focusing on the embedded and operational carbon within a building. And yet that is how so much of the built environment addresses an approach towards sustainability. So What we believe is that we need to take a wider approach, not just take this carbon tunnel
Yeah.
sense of how we approach sustainability in the built environment, but to think of all of these issues as being interlinked, as being joined up, to take a more systemic approach to how we consider the built environment, and to think about, really important issues like the health and well-being, not just of human beings, but of all life, how we create an environment that supports biodiversity, how we tackle the issues of ecotoxicity, poverty, inequality, how we deal with resource scarcity, the water crisis, and air pollution. There are so many issues that are entirely interlinked that we can't just be focusing on carbon as the magic bullet to solve our approach to creating a more sustainable built environment. And then we need to kind of have this joined up thinking to solve these complex issues in order to create a healthier, more resilient environment where all life can flourish.
Mm. Absolutely. And the whole biophilia concept is about this life and living systems, isn't it? And it's refreshing to hear. And I think maybe there is a bit of a, I don't say trend, but the movement towards understanding that this whole net zero approach is not just about, like you say, carbon tunneling. We have to be looking at biodiversity. We have to be looking at all these things, and the systemic approach has to be the way forward. Are you finding, sorry, I'm going off piste a little bit here, but are you finding companies receptive to that or understanding that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, more and more we're being brought on as consultants alongside structures, lighting, sustainability kind of consultants. So what is clear is that this area of biophilic design is becoming much more recognizable, much more tangible. It's seen to be adding value to the approach and the delivery of spaces that support health and well-being, and that it's a much more holistic approach. So we're getting to work on some really exciting projects. And what's really clear to me is that, that the clients are seeing this as a real unique approach that adds, a real point of difference towards their competitors as well. Particularly as we're demonstrating the evidence behind these features, which helps convince them that it's not just about the short-term costs, it's about the long-term value of what we're doing, for the current approach to the built environment, but also for future generations.
Yeah, and it's a good story for them as well, isn't it?
It really is. Yes, yes. When they sort of say this building has been specifically designed to support your mental and physical well-being, your emotional state, to support your cognitive functioning, to help you work, focus, rest, restore, come back feeling energized and stimulated. These are really important messages for all types of organizations. So, whether we're working for workplaces, education settings, hospitality, healthcare, residential settings, these messages drop in so well, and it's so fundamental to the marketing, the communication of what the building is going to be and what it's going to be delivering for the occupants.
Yeah. And as you're saying, when you overlay that on top of everything else, just the physical and mental health, but the actual health of the planet as well. And
Hmm,
the Biophilic design supports all that with the, bio-based materials,
yeah.
everything else that we try and advocate.
Yeah, I mean, so often as well, biophilic design is the sort of visual messaging or interpretation of the
Yeah.
values of the organization and the approach to creating a sustainable regenerative building. So when we walk into a space and it seems to be lush and thriving, there's light streaming down, it smells and feels good, there's plants and there's greenery that are growing all over the place. It's really evident to people that when they walk in, that this is a place that can support life. And so it's sort of communicating the messages of so many of the other features that are often hidden, whether it's, the mechanical and the electrical, the heating systems, the lighting, the thermal insulation, all of these things are kind of embedded within the building, but they're not often that obvious. And of course, you might be communicating the operational carbon or the amount of kilowatts per hour a building is using, but that's a really difficult one for people to get their heads around when they see that life can be supported so well and that it can flourish in such an obvious way. People feel much more comfortable, more relaxed, healthier, and supported.
It's lovely. I think that's great because yeah, biophilic design, plants, all this kind of thing, where is actually a visual manifestation of their sustainability approach,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
approach to people. Yeah. Um, I've heard you speak so brilliantly, and you have spoken before on our podcast too, on how biophilic design supports the senses. I mean, you've mentioned just there about how, a biophilic design space can support the physical and mental health of people, their flourishing and everything. Can you share some thoughts maybe on how we create inclusive spaces, maybe with an example or something as well?
Yeah, this is such a fascinating area and one that we're being asked to consider more and more. And it's actually has become a fundamental approach to the way that we start the design process. And that's with the recognition that as human beings, our senses evolved in nature over hundreds of thousands of years. And, we are sensory beings. We receive a staggering 11 million bits of sensory information every single second. It's kind of overwhelming. And as a result, actually only 50 of which we can kind of process consciously. So, if you ever feel overwhelmed, that's quite understandable. And, you're not the only one. So we recognize that as humans that evolved in nature, we now live in dense, noisy, geometric, urban, very unnatural environments, but our senses haven't really evolved or changed. We still have these sort of seven recognized sensory systems. We've got the visual, the auditory, the tactile sense, the olfactory, our sense of smell, gustatory. But we also have two others that we may not kind of be so familiar with, our vestibular sense, which is our sense of balance and our sense of gravity, and proprioception as well, which is the position of body in space, which is derived from muscle and joint feedback. And of course, we need both of those other senses if we were living in the wild and trying to kind of provide our families with food, to protect ourselves, to hunt, to gather. We need all of these senses. Just imagine the complexity of the senses to see an apple in a tree, to jump up, to grab it, to land safely without injuring yourself, or to hunt a wild animal. You know, all of those are important to our ability to survive and thrive and to flourish. And we still have them today. We just live in quite different sensory environments. And as a result, we all can get very easily overwhelmed because not only do we have this kind of built environment that is quite unnatural, we also have all that technology around us, which on the one hand can be completely amazing and do all sorts of amazing, brilliant things to connect us, but equally it's so distracting and we're just kind of overwhelmed by it. It said that we touch our phone over 2,600 times a day. Even having an unread email in your inbox while concentrating can reduce your effective IQ by 10 points. And even having, a simple distraction of somebody coming to talk to you can take you over 23 minutes to get back to a task at hand. So for lots and lots of reasons, we're very, very distracted. And as well as that, it's worth recognizing that with a greater level of a kind of identification, we're now recognizing that over 15% of the population of the population are neurodivergent. So we've got this whole section of the society that have these incredible skills, incredible things to offer. It's just that they feel very uncomfortable in many of the environments, the kind of typical environments that we expect everybody to feel happy within. So what's fundamental to our role now is taking this sensory comfort approach and recognizing that we all exist on a scale of being hyper to hyposensitive. So either we crave a little bit of sensory stimulation and we need that to work better, or equally, we might be hyposensitive and we might sort of shy away from loud noises or strong smells or kind of abrasive textures, whatever. So there is this kind of incredible diversity that exists within our population. And when we're designing spaces, it's important to recognize that this incredible diversity exists within our sensory comfort thresholds, and that might change throughout the day depending on if we're hungry, if we're tired, on our deadlines, on a whole range of things. So it's important to create a whole range of different types of space, types of furniture, types of ways of being that support quite different activities, whether you want to sit and focus and concentrate, whether you want to meet and talk and be social, or whether you just need time away. And think about how the senses impact that space and how the senses might support the emotional state of that person to do whatever it is they need to be doing better. And I think that nature has a really fundamental role to play within it, in part because it's a universal design ethos. We all enjoy and aspire to be in and around nature more and more, and that it can support so many of those physiological and psychological issues that we face every day. So this issue around the senses is so important, particularly now as we recognize a greater number of people as being neurodivergent, and the need to design the built environment to support them because they're so fundamental to what we do and to doing it better and in a more innovative way.
Mm. And I think what you said earlier as well about, the biophilic design, we focus on the visual. We, like that was, putting a plant in the corner historically, that was like, oh yeah, we've done biophilic design by shoving a plant in the corner. But I think the greater awareness of how biophilic design or the concept of biophilic design and the patterns and all this kind of thing can support our fundamental rhythm, if you want, as a human being, with the sound. These the sort of things that we can't see really. That's like you just said, these seven senses. People might not think like how we move around in a space affects us. And I remember when we did a podcast before that you mentioned about the proprioception and how you can step down into spaces and places, and it's not just on one level. You mentioned how we landscape. I mean, we talk about landscaping offices and all that kind of thing, but it's really important to have that greater kind of understanding of how a space affects our senses.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, there's such diversity within our populations, and we need to, as designers, I think we have a responsibility to design um, diverse range of spaces and ways to operate within that space to consider inclusivity as a fundamental part of everything that we do. So when we approach a design of a space, we often think about this sort of sensory threshold and the zones that deliver that, going from high threshold spaces that are noisy and bustly and colorful and stimulating through to kind of medium threshold spaces that are a little bit calmer and kind of flexible, down to those low threshold spaces that support calm, restorative, recuperative experiences.
Mm, lovely. Um, I do want to talk about how, so this is, I mean, you're obviously doing this all the time. Obviously I'm advocating it. And there's obviously designers here who kind of, say, yes, it's great if we can get in really early, we can influence the design decision. We can influence how the client is going to create a space. We can even get in even earlier with the architects, then we've even got greater influence. But some designers who might be coming in and going, right, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to bring in some biophilic design, but then, it's classically value engineered out. I mean, what are what are your yeah, counter arguments to prevent this from happening? Or maybe you could maybe give some advice to maybe some other designers. I mean, you've been doing this a long time, Oliver, and people trust you. So I suppose when you go to a place, you also people go, okay, he knows what he's talking about. But if there's a designer that's trying to advocate it or influence their client to design better and more biophilically, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, initially it's about educating and awareness, getting people on your side, helping them to understand that the aspiration to be in and around nature is something that is within us all. So it becomes this universal design ethos. It's a design approach that everybody can enjoy when there are so many other design styles out there vying for attention. So creating some sense of alignment that the ideas that you're talking about are things that your client also individually believes in and feels and is passionate about, but get them to recognize that it's not just about myself and themselves, it's also about all of the people in their organization. And to do this, the first thing that we'll always do is present targeted, focused evidence that demonstrates previous projects that maybe have happened for other organizations and other countries, and that this evidence is kind of just piques their interest. That demonstrates actually that the short-term costs are far outweighed by the long-term benefits of applying biophilic design. Now, once we've done that, we would always advocate to actually undertake real life studies through pre and post occupancy evaluation. So we've done this in multiple projects where we found clients who are brave enough to go to their staff, the occupants of their buildings, and say, how do you feel when you arrive? What's it like to work here? Can you focus? Do you get distracted? Do you feel like you've done a good day's work? How do you feel when you leave the building? Are you able to kind of de-stress and recuperate when you get home? Do you get a good night's sleep? And you can do these as qualitative studies. We've also worked with the Building Research Establishment and undertaken quantitative studies by getting people to do kind of saliva tests to test kind of cortisol levels and get them to wear kind of wearable technology to measure their heart rates and sleeping rates. So that side of stuff can be a little bit invasive, but if you've got people who are keen to get involved, then the results are kind of really fascinating. And if you can do that pre-occupancy study, you set a baseline that goes like, you thought the problem with your building and your organization was this, but actually what the evidence suggests is these are the problems that we need to sort out. And that becomes a much more informed, deeper, richer brief for which we can then address. And then when we do the project, and we can undertake a similar level of post-occupancy evaluation, we can demonstrate the improvement on that baseline, and that's really important. So that's a little bit of a long-term process, but essentially what we need to do is to get everybody on board, all of the kind of consultants and the client and the kind of project professionals on board and create what we now call of a sort of ecosystem or approach of well-being so that everybody recognizes that the role that they are delivering within the project has some scope to create a place that is more successful, where people are happier and healthier, where they want to come. When they're in the space, they'll be more productive and more creative. And that will also help to reduce some of those negative hidden issues. Maybe it's absenteeism or presenteeism when people turn up for work but aren't in a good state to do so. So this ecosystem of well-being is really about getting everybody aligned and convincing and helping people understand that the things that are important to them are also probably important to the people within the building. And, we can do that through trying to convince people, but of course there are other sort of standards by which we can do that by, like the WELL standard that will help to align all the kind of project consultants in a project.
So essentially, it's presenting the concept, the principles in a very simple way, I suppose, and to help ensure everyone's aligned. Like you just said, what was it? Ecosystem well-being approach. What did you say? What was the
Yeah,
what
yeah.
was
It's
it?
essentially it's sort of an ecosystem of well-being within the kind of
Yeah.
project consultants.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. I do want to sort of to also talk about education. This whole greenwashing thing. I know we've spoke about net zero and carbon reduction and all this kind of thing, but there is an issue with this greenwashing. People going, yes, I've put a wooden table in there, and then you discovered it's like some kind of weird sort of endangered species tree, something that was cut down last week, and it was all really not good.
Mm.
But I think obviously genuinely, I mean, I think people are trying to do the right thing. I think essentially they want to do the right thing. They might not, they might think they don't have the budget, but obviously we know we can do this on a budget. We know it doesn't always have to cost the earth, literally, in more ways than one. Um, do you feel that companies are trying to do the right thing? Do you think that where they're falling short, there needs to be more education? Or, how do we help them implement biophilic design in the way it should be? What's the bit that's missing? How do we address that? How do we get them from like just sticking the plant in the corner and saying, I've done it and there you go, box ticked, to actually doing the fully fledged, beautiful, biophilically designed solution that we know we should have?
Yeah. Um, I think it is difficult because, to a certain extent, there is a trend for putting planting greenery into buildings. And it is so expressive about the quality of the space that it's difficult to detach what you're seeing from the real values and ethos of an organization. So I don't think it's necessarily greenwashing to uh, uh, um, to mislead people, but actually maybe what they're doing isn't sort of fully embedded holistically throughout the organization. So I think what is really important is to educate better, uh, to help organizations see that it's not just through the input and the specification of planting within a building, but that's just the first step, and that we need to think in a much wider approach. Um, Maybe take a more systemic approach, really, that seeing it's not just about the things you put in the building, but about looking downstream at, where have these things come from? How have they been created, supported? Who's been affected by them? How have they been transported and brought to a location? How are they going to be used? How do we support them? How do we make sure there's longevity in their use? And when they are finished in that space, where do they go to afterwards? So take a more holistic or systemic approach to the inclusion of these features, I think is important. I've mentioned that pre and post occupancy is really important to kind of question the people within the building. Um, and that helps kind of pull forward some of the real concerns and the issues that are going on. So again, that is about awareness and education. And I think there is also a really important role for building standards to be applied. At the moment, the UK's building standards are not up to scratch. They don't really truly support a healthier built environment for all life. But what we are seeing are non-mandatory standards such as the Well Building Standard or the Living Building Challenge stepping into that role of being something that organizations can adopt, either as a framework to use or hopefully as a kind of an accreditation which they can use to demonstrate that the building is truly and deeply a better place to live and work. And those standards really do focus minds and building project partners to do better, whether that's through air quality, through materials, through water quality, through the food that's being served, through the ability of a space to support agility and mental well-being and communities. And the standards are set and then retested every few years to make sure that the building and the organizational structure is still aligned with that. So I think there's a number of ways that we can do it better and be more aligned. And we are seeing more and more organizations be mindful of those standards and either use them as a framework, but equally to apply them as an accreditation system, which they can communicate proudly to future occupants of the building.
Yeah, that's lovely, and also it helps increase the real estate value ultimately as well.
Yeah.
If they've created something that's better and more sustainable, and I think we've just got to appreciate that going forward as the years roll on and as the climate crisis accelerates and everything else accelerates, that is going to have an impact. The way we've designed our buildings with the future in mind has to have an impact on the value of your property going forward. So we don't know
Mm,
what the legislation is going to be in 5 years' time, where they're going to be asking for specification for, like, is it cradle to cradle? Is it this? Like you just said, what's the end of life of the furniture that you're putting into your space? So really, I think you're right. I think, obviously education and everything, but also the building standards needs to change, taking into consideration the things that are already working, like the Well Building Standard or the Living Building Challenge. If elements of those things were brought into legislation, global, obviously UK, we're talking about UK here at the moment, but across Europe and across the world, then they'd have to do the right thing. And it would also help the people that want to do the right thing persuade the financial department, which is
mm.
often the thing that says, no, why are we doing that? To understand, well, we need to do it because it's law.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it has to become mandatory. And the risk is at the moment, if it's not mandatory, then organizations will find themselves with essentially, dead stock, building stock on their hands, buildings that are just not fit for purpose and that won't um, create the value for them to be kind of refurbished and used in the future. So, there's a real risk that buildings will fall out of use and financially won't be viable.
Yeah, exactly. So it just makes sense for anybody who's building a new space to have these things in place for future, disposal, if you want, whatever that disposal with a small d might look like. So um, I do want to talk about some of the projects that you've done recently, if that's okay. So
Mm,
I particularly the one that's really I just really absolutely love because that's the tree hugger in me, but these beautiful spaces that you've created for forest holidays.
yeah.
I mean, honestly, that's so stunning. So I'm going to put a link and some visuals on the spiel that goes with the podcast on the website, journalofbiophilicdesign.com. Go to the podcast tab and you'll be able to find this podcast and some pictures of it. But Oliver, can you tell us a little bit about that project that you've been involved
Yeah,
in?
this was like a dream project for a biophilic designer. This is great. Yeah. So we got approached by this company, Forest Holidays, who create holiday cabins in forests owned by Forest England. Um, so they're across the UK, and they've got a number of different sites. And what they do is they build these beautiful wooden cabins sort of dotted through a forest. So when you're in one, you can sort of see another sort of through the trees. And they had this new site opening up in Glentress, which is near to the Scottish borders. It's set in this beautiful forest on top of a hill, and it just looks out over these kind of stunning valleys. And we were asked to design the interiors of 5 different cabins. So the kind of external framework was already built. But imagine a timber cabin with a deck. They often have sort of jacuzzis out there as well. They look really beautiful. Um, and when we received them, there was a stark difference really between the exterior environment of these beautiful forests with the pine trees and the needles and all the kind of ferns, the flowers, the fauna, the flora, the light that kind of filtered through the trees was really beautiful because I was there in about November last year, the year before last. And what we found was that when we walked in, that the interior didn't really reflect the external environment at all. So it feels sort of disconnected. You'd step in, you go, oh, okay, I'm inside now. And so what we thought was there was incredible opportunity to create some ecological and cultural context within the interior of the space. So we had 5 different cabins to do, and we wanted them all to reflect this kind of wonderful forest environment. So to reflect the natural colors, the materials, the textures, and really importantly, this was a really interesting one, the visual richness of being in the forest. Because when you're in the forest, you've got these incredible fractal patterns happening. And I don't know if you know about statistical fractals, I'm sure you do. But statistical fractals are basically repeating patterns that we find in nature. If you think of, say, a snowflake, how when you zoom in on a snowflake, there you've got the shape of the snowflake, and as you zoom in more and more, that same pattern and shape is reflected at different scales. So there was an incredible sense of visual richness through these fractal patterns that we were seeing in the trees and the branches and the leaves and the veins and the roots and all the kind of flora within the forest that just wasn't represented at all. So it felt quite stark when you walked in, when actually you wanted it to feel safe and warm, to be able to look out of the window and have that sense of prospect and refuge, but still have that sense of being in a cabin in the woods. So we used local materials such as timber to reflect the verticality, the greenery, the visual richness. We use colors inspired by the local rock and some of the flora. And it was just such a wonderful project to work on. And what was really interesting is when you walked into the finished cabin, it just sort of felt right. You'd sort of look through the interior of the cabin and you'd see the vertical timber paneling and you'd see the colors and textures and the materials on the tiles and the floor. And you'd gaze out the window and it'd just be a really nice, gentle transition from one space to another. And, it's always exciting when you're designing something to have this idea and go like, you know what, I think that's the issue. And if we do it, tackle that issue in this way, it's going to feel more comfortable and relaxed. It's going to help us to create a greater sense of rest and relaxation within the cabin. And that's exactly what it did. So yeah, it was a really fantastic project to be part of.
Oh, lovely. I wish workplaces were actually designed. Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Imagine if the workplaces were actually in the forest. It'd be completely different.
Well, yeah, I mean, all these projects are sort of interlinked. I mean, more and more, we're seeing elements of hospitality within the workplace. We're seeing the workplace sort of feed into residential settings. And so there is this sort of crossover. So I think it's quite relevant to take experience that you garnered from one building typology and learn the lessons and take them into another.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sort of shifting a little bit, but you've done work with John Lewis,
Yeah.
which people know as a retail, as a shop. But you've done something quite interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with them, please?
Yeah, so this was interesting. John Lewis are the owners of Waitrose stores, and they are shifting their business model towards residential buy to let, build to rent. Sorry, build to rent. And what that basically means is Waitrose are building homes, residential units above their existing stores, and then they're becoming landlords. So essentially, they want to build homes that people kind of firstly aspire to that reflect the John Lewis and the Waitrose values. And to their credit, what they recognized was that really importantly to the kind of future occupants was a sense of community. And that question of how do we build a community within these spaces, and they recognize that actually nature has a really fundamental role to play. And this is interesting to us because we've done a lot of work on this idea of how we enhance a sense of community through biophilic design. So we've previously looked at the work of Macmillan and Chavis, who are psychologists who are interested in how we create communities, and we combine that with the work of Stephen Kellett and created features that could be applied to the built environment that would enhance that sense of connection to place, but also the people and the nature within it, and to help form stronger communities. So we had this fantastic opportunity to work with John Lewis and their build to rent schemes that essentially were above existing stores. We were working alongside urban planners, landscapers, architects, interior designers, the facilities managers. And what we found was that everybody was sort of starting to align, but our role was really to recognize this sort of fluid experience of the building occupants and create what we've called a green thread of well-being, so that as the occupants of the building approach the space, they walk through these beautiful gardens with a range of spaces to stop and sit and for the children to play and to support people's mental well-being through that kind of connection to nature. Our role was then to encourage and help raise awareness of the opportunities that the architects could adopt to connect with that garden. And then as we walk, approach the building and walk into it, how do we then create that sense of well-being into the interior of the space through the lobby, the reception spaces, the public amenities, into the corridors, into the upper level balconies and the co-working spaces, and continue that sense of well-being right into the design of the residential units, and consider how people in those units might stop, rest, restore, relax at the end of a busy day, how they might sleep better, how they might support their circadian rhythm, how they might wake up feeling more refreshed. So the sense of a green thread of well-being became our mantra and our role through the projects that we initiated. And we're still working with them across a range of other projects. Some of them are new build and some of them are refurbishment projects. But it's a really interesting idea that that sense of well-being shouldn't just stop in the public realm outside in the built environment. And the question is, how do we continue it in every space? And that every space has the opportunity to support people's physical, mental, and emotional well-being, and also potentially connect them to the people around them to enhance that sense of community. Because when people are happier and healthier and more connected to their neighbors, then they're less likely to leave because they feel like they're part of something bigger. And that's obviously a really important factor in the business case for why biophilic design is so important for John Lewis.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thanks. That's one of the beautiful things I think about biophilic design isn't just about materials, it's also these living systems and community, this kind of interconnectivity of all life, all living systems, and that's us included. And it's beautiful what you're doing there, and also that they've got that future thinking,
Yeah, I
concept.
mean, all credit to them for
Yeah,
recognizing that nature is important, not just in the public realm, but also that sense of well-being that we gather from it should be, dotted all the way through. Every space should be a healthy space.
love that. Fantastic. And so you've been working with Knight Frank as well. So
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah, another building typology. Yeah, this is another one. We've been doing a lot of workplace design because this is
okay.
the area that you can really demonstrate
Yeah.
the true value of health and well-being and biophilic features because you can really start to kind of interrogate those ideas of productivity and creativity and conversation and talk to people about how they feel in spaces. And there's such an important commercial reason for doing that. So the Night Frank project was, you know, quite a small project in some sense that there wasn't an enormous budget. But basically, we were asked to refurbish an office with about 40 workers in it. The budgets were really tight. So this really forced us to consider how we might apply biophilic design thinking in the most efficient way. What delivers the biggest bang for your buck or delivers the greatest return? Now, the reason why I got excited about doing this one was because the project manager had undertaken a pre-occupancy evaluation. So I know this sounds a bit boring, but for me, this was like, wow, that's amazing. That's a really unusual thing to do. So they undertook this kind of extensive survey. They asked all their people a series of different questions about how they felt, how productive they were. Um, what they thought about the catering. I mean, it really, honestly, it went down to like, are you happy with the food offering? And there was quite a lot of murmurings about the number of bananas in the kitchen. So it really got down to quite a lot of granular detail about banana numbers, which obviously was outside of our remit a little bit, but it was important that it came up. So we got this really extensive brief and a set of ideas that we needed to kind of work on. And then it was like, right, here's the budget. What are you going to do? So we looked at the space. We looked at the way the spaces were being used, the number of meeting rooms. What the kind of survey did reveal was that there wasn't much space for people to have sort of informal meetings or incidental connections or spaces to stop and sit and to make it feel like it was part of a community. It was all designed like a typical office. You got a tiny kitchen and you got lots of meeting rooms of different sizes with closed doors, and everybody felt, that there wasn't much sort of connectivity outside of those closed door meetings. Um, so yeah, we rethought the space. We opened a few spaces up. We made space for incidental touchdown meetings, spaces where people could grab a cup of coffee. You could have a quiet conversation with some acoustic furniture. So we thought not just about the layout of the space, but also considered these sensory comfort thresholds and ensured that we had spaces that were exciting and stimulating. So spaces that were sensorially quite enlivening, like the kitchen area, you got the smell of coffee or juice, or you're eating something, or you're talking and gathering, there's lots of kind of hustle and bustle. But equally have a range of other places where people could have a quiet conversation, or they could sit and focus without being disturbed, or they could have a quiet conversation with somebody in private, or just go and have 5 minutes to stop, rest, and recuperate with a view onto some trees and greenery. So we sort of thought about this whole mix of different spaces. We delivered it kind of within budget, which wasn't easy. I mean, to the point that we weren't even able to paint entire walls. When we added color, we could only add like a band of color with the eye line because that's all we could afford really. So it really was quite challenging. But the results were amazing because at the end they did this post-occupancy evaluation study. They did the same study all over again, and the results that we got were amazing.
Really.
For the amount of money they spent per person, essentially productivity went up by 18%.
Wow.
Um, 18% is massive,
It's
isn't it?
massive.
That's really a lot. Can you imagine doing 18% more work in a day or a week or a year? That's good.
Yeah.
Um, Meeting productivity went up by 22%. General
Wow.
well-being went up by over 28%.
Wow.
A general sense of pride in the office, so that people are happier working there, went up by 20%. Focus was increased by nearly 12%,
Wow.
and sensory stimulation went up by 48%. I still think there was probably a lack of bananas. unfortunately. So we didn't address everything. We should have just put a bigger bowl. I don't know, made it look like whatever. However, I am pretty proud with some of those numbers. So that is a remarkable result from a project that was very efficiently funded, we should say. But it was, it was great to get some of that live kind of feedback. The sort of qualitative feedback was really amazing, and the quantitative numbers really demonstrated that as well. So yeah, that was a really good one.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's brilliant. But it just shows what you can do even with a really tight budget when you know what
E-
you're doing.
Exactly. It's about creativity and providing you've got the right brief, you can really target what it is that you do and how you deliver it.
Mm.
And, we've always been great advocates for the idea that biophilic design isn't about spending loads of money. It is about understanding what the issues are, and applying just a few key principles in a really well targeted, cost efficient manner, and using creativity to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. I think if there's any businesses out there, I think they'll be banging at your door next week.
Well, that would be absolutely lovely. We're always open for new exciting projects.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot. I mean, we're getting near the end, but before I get to the final thing, I can't let you go without talking about interior design declares. And I know we did a very quick, we spoke about it with Chloe Bullock,
Yeah.
at different places actually at Future Build and that, but I've done a podcast with her. But can you tell us about what it is, your involvement in it, and then maybe also if people who are listening, how they can get involved?
Yeah, so Interior Design Declares was set up by a series of founding signatories, of which Chloe is one and very active. That was amazing, just got so much energy. I was another founding signatory to it as well. And essentially, we're a group of interior designers, material suppliers, organizations involved in the built environment, in materials and products. That recognize the kind of the crises that we're facing, the climate breakdown, the biodiversity loss, as really, really enormous issues that us in the built environment can do something about. Buildings and constructions play such a key part, accounting for nearly 40% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions, and whilst also, of course, having an enormous impact on natural habitats and resource use. So IDD, Interior Design Declares, encourages everyone in the built environment to take part, not just in minimizing impact, but to commence a regenerative approach to the built environment. And we now have an amazing 341 member organizations joining us in that. And essentially, it's a pledge to commit to doing better, to acting better, to doing what we can through design, through specification, through education, awareness, and client advice, helping them to think not just about the long-term goals, but also how we get over those short-term costs. Interior Design Declares has, 12 pledges that we encourage everybody to align to. And those are around the subjects of raising awareness, advocating for faster change in the industry, sharing knowledge and research, taking greater care around evaluating new projects and challenges, trying to consider the whole life cycle, cost analysis of the interior spaces that we create, aiming for reuse and refurbishment as opposed to new build, and also advocating for equality and energy and resource efficiency. So a number of different issues. So we really do encourage everybody in the built environment to align. If not with Interior Design Declares, then one of the other declare movements for architecture or the built environment. There's a group really for everybody in the built environment, just to get on board, to be part of the conversation, to go and attend a few talks, to meet others who are doing similar things, and work out strategies for how we address the built environment, and encourage the whole environment, the group to do better.
Fantastic. Well, I'm hoping the interior IDD, Interior Design Declares, will have some kind of presence at the conference. So people, if they're interested, do come along so they can talk to people from Interior Design Declares. And obviously, Oliver, you'll be there too. Before I ask you the final magic question that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast to get an update from yourself, is there anything else that you might like to add?
Well, I mean, it's been fun talking as ever. It's always great to talk to you, Ness. We're really keen to continue that sense of sharing of knowledge. So if people are interested in some of the things we've discussed today, there are a number of white papers that you can download for free on our website, oliverheathdesign.com. all about different approaches to biophilic design. We've also got an online course called Biophilic Design in the Home, which sort of takes the ideas and knowledge that we've learned in the commercial world and applied them to residential settings. And also, as you mentioned at the beginning, we've written this book, Design a Healthy Home by Dorling Kindersley, who are the publishers, which is out now, which is really a kind of an introduction to all the things you need to consider to create a happier and healthier place to live.
It's lovely, thank you. And so yeah, do go to their website and obviously if you want any support, if you're a business, because I know there's businesses listening to the podcast, do reach out to Oliver and his team who can definitely help you. So yeah, I do encourage that. So and obviously he's going to be at the conference. So one more final plug for the Biophilic Design Conference.com. Go to that website and you can find out more information about what Oliver's going to be speaking about and a bit more about what the sort of plans are for the conference. So Oliver, final question. As an update on your thing and with the climate crisis and everything else,
Yeah.
innovation and all that kind of thing, what would be if you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, Oliver, what would it be?
Yeah. It's great to come back to this question, and I'm an avid listener to your podcast and all the incredible people that you speak to. And it's so fascinating hearing everybody's approach. So I've sort of tried to give this a little bit of thought of how I might update what I probably said last time. And so reflecting on a little bit of what we've discussed today, I'd like to adapt a well-known quote from the author, William Gibson. And so my adapted quote is, the biophilic future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. So my vision for a biophilic world is one that offers nature-rich spaces that are diverse, that are accessible, inclusive, and equitable. And I believe that these are all aspirations that we really can achieve.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.